actually a good question then. We're talking about power, and we've obviously talked about speed, and we've talked about strength for anyone watching. What's the difference between all three? And then how do they all play a part with each other?
Oh, great question. Oh my God. Each power, strength, and speed, each one are their own episode, but I will attempt. So all three are a little different. So let's start with speed. Speed generally is your ability to go from A to B in a straight line.
Yeah.
It's how quickly you can get from A to B in a straight line.
Quickly to accomplish a task.
Correct.
Yeah.
Multi-directional speed, which is what I teach. It's your ability, your B is random. Your B has an angle, right? So it would be more like velocity, which velocity would be speed with direction, right? So when people say speed kills, it's actually more like velocity kills because every sport requires angle. So, and every sport requires direction. So being able to move my body quickly, A to B, while I'm attacking the basket, while I'm rounding first to get to second.
Yeah.
But speed generally is your ability to cover distance fast. It's how fast you can cover an A to B in a straight line.
Gotcha.
Strength is your ability to produce or resist force. So if I'm producing force, I would have to move me to move something else. That something else could be an object. So let's say, for example, if I'm throwing a ball, I have to move me and I have to build up all this kinetic energy and I have to transfer that kinetic energy into that ball so that ball can go far. So I'm using, that would be an expression of strength. That's why they'll say things like arm strength.
Yeah.
So it's my ability to move myself. I'm producing force and I'm transferring that kinetic energy into the object. Or I'm transferring that force into another person, a running back, let's say trucking somebody, or a linebacker making a tackle, or a wrestler doing a double leg takedown, right? Yeah. I'm creating force to overcome inertia, or I'm trying to move this object that doesn't want to be moved, i.e. another person.
Yeah.
Or maybe a hockey player, he's fighting for position, right? Or a basketball player boxing somebody out. I'm using strength to move someone or to resist something.
Gotcha. So
Strength is the ability to produce force or resist force. Resisting would be boxing out, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to position and then I'm trying to keep the position.
It might even be both. It might be trying to create force.
Say that. Yeah. It's going to be both.
Yeah.
So sport strength, the object is fighting me back.
Yeah.
The other person, the puck is moving, the ball is moving, the soccer ball, the basketball. So the objects tend to move. Now, if it's like weight room, the object's not going to fight you back, maybe gravity and the weight of it.
Yeah.
So then you have power. Power is just marrying the two together. Speed times strength equals power. Or velocity times strength, or stability times movement, or movement times control. There's a lot of different definitions. I've actually written articles on different forms of power, but essentially it's your ability to have control. That would be strength while producing force very quickly. So speed and strength would be power.
I feel like it can get kind of complicated at times because we talk about how doing sprints can actually be correlated more towards power, right? Because we have to create the strength to push our own body and create force. And then we're also not trying to create speed at the same time. So what does actual speed training itself look like? Is it always going to be kind of somewhat mixed in with power, or is there actually...
I do view speed training and power training as almost being synonymous. Because speed to me is just acceleration. And to enhance speed, I have to be able to tap into a power zone. Yeah. So if I never train those efforts, those maximal efforts, my speed's not going to improve. Don't get me wrong. Training level 1, like for example, when I have kids start practicing sprinting, just by learning better technique, they'll get faster. But the reality is they didn't get faster. I will have kids come in, and this happens all the time. In the first session, they're already faster. And their parents are like freaking out, like, oh my God, they got faster in one session. And I'm just like, no, they didn't get faster. They had that speed all along. We just unlocked it. We tapped into it. Yeah. So, the one of the buzzwords that gets used a lot in the speed community and in athletic community is the word unlock. But it is a real word.
Yeah.
Unlock to me means I'm tapping into something that I already had, and now I'm getting access to it. I'm teaching them how to access something they already have. Speed development is I'm trying to enhance their attributes. I'm trying to increase their baseline.
The more and more even we talk about speed and power, I was starting to come to that realization, wow, they're kind of just synonymous to each other. Why talk about even speed when they kind of more so correlate to the power more often than not? So I was like, for all the parents out there too, what's really the biggest difference? But
here's another thing too about like speed. It's not just power, because power is 90 to 100. Speed could also be 40%. So let's say, for example, if I'm accelerating, right? Acceleration simply means I'm trying to get up to a certain speed by a certain point. So if I have a point A to point B, so let's say I'm running a post, right? That's the route I'm running, a 10-yard post. I want to get to a certain speed by a certain distance, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that speed is 80%. Where I teach athletes how to get faster with lower efforts is by teaching them how to properly transition their efforts from 20 to 40 to 60 to 80. Because the acceleration, you want to hit your peak speed by the time you hit that point, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of emphasis gets put on like first step, quickness, right? First step. And once again, going back to effort, everybody thinks that the first steps, if I tell an athlete, give me 100%, they think the first step has to be 100%. But then things break down, their mechanics break down. So if I were to just explode off the line, then I'm using my high efforts early, when acceleration is a buildup, it's a progression, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm like Usain Bolt, when he gets 100, he can't just be like 100 off the block. He has to start at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Now, proper acceleration, people who are really good at acceleration, they can tap into those higher efforts earlier. So for example, if you compare a Lamborghini going 0 to 60 and a Honda Civic going 0 to 60, what's the biggest difference? Huh?
Engine?
No, they both can get 0 to 60. What's the biggest difference on how they achieve it? How fast they get there. So the 0 to 60 for the Lamborghini is like 2.3 seconds, right?
Yeah.
The Honda Civic gets there tomorrow. But they still get there, right?
Yeah.
So one of the strategies that I'll use is I'll teach them how to achieve an effort and how to transition their speed from one level to the other level.
Gotcha.
So when someone talks about like having a good first step, I want my first step to be as effective as possible. And my definition of effective is I'm taking a step that sets up my next step. So every step is a setup step.
Yeah.
So me saying, I want you to go as hard as possible doesn't mean on your first step. There's a cadence, right?
Yeah.
And over time, as the nervous system gets built up, just like that Lamborghini that has a bigger engine, they can tap into higher speeds earlier.
Yeah. It's kind of just like the Mike Robertson statement he had in his certification of 40%. Start off at 40% of whatever you think your max is, get comfortable with that, and then progress and increase it. Like you said, with the sprints too.
There you go.
Get the lower and increase the higher. How important, because you did mention it a little bit earlier, but we didn't dive into it. How important is mobility into speed? How important is that you are mobile and able to move for speed?
It is the foundation of my training. So everybody who trains with me or has trained with me, they know that. So I always say with mobility, there's two general ways that people approach it. I'm talking about the people who actually do it. There's a third category of people who never train mobility, and that's a really big issue, and I think they know they should. But the two general ways that people train mobility is you have person A who uses mobility as a warm up to be able to do the strength session, the speed session. They're using mobility to get loose. They're using mobility to stimulate the nervous system. So it's something that they do for the session, but they don't. So they're doing mobility. What I do is I train mobility.
Attention.
It's the biggest difference is the intention. So with doing mobility, you're not putting pure intention into it. Yeah, you're still going to feel a little good. You do some A skips, do some,
Yeah.
some pendulum swings, and your nervous system will get a little stimulated, right? So I'm not saying that's wrong.
Yeah.
There's a time and place for that, but there's a big difference in doing mobility versus training mobility. So what's training? Training, like I defined earlier, is you're stressing out the body.
Yeah.
Purposely stressing out your body in a controlled environment to promote adaptation, strength,
Development.
yeah. So you want your tissues to improve. So if your joint is the deepest connective tissue in the human body. So if you take all the tissues that make up the human body, all connective tissue, fascia, muscle, tendon, ligament, all the blood, right?
Yeah.
You take all the connective tissues and all the cells that make up our body. The deepest tissue in the human body is your bones, your skeletal structure, right?
Yeah.
And if you understand that, that means if I put stress into a joint and I understand that all those connective tissues are layered on top of that joint, by putting stress into the joint, all the other connective tissues are also going to reap the same benefits.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of this will make sense in a second. I'm going to use the example of steroids. Because if you take somebody who's on steroids, people who take steroids, they're prone to injuries that other people are not. They're known to have connective tissue tears, pec tears, bicep tears, things of that nature. And the reason being is when you take an anabolic, right?
Yeah.
It makes existing cells bigger. So the muscle fibers grow really, really fast. So you take someone takes steroids, like you look at a professional bodybuilder.
Yeah.
They have so much muscle in their body that's literally impossible. You'll have someone who's like 5'5" that weighs 270 with abs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And because their body is in this constant state of being anabolic, they're able to build their red tissue, their muscle fibers. They're able to build it very quickly, literally overnight.
I think I see where this is going now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden one day they're benching. They're not even doing anything crazy. I had a friend of mine, I won't say who, but I was spotting him on a bench press. He was on his warm up. This guy could rep out 3 plates for 10 reps like it was butter. It was pretty strong. He could rep out 4 plates.
Yeah.
On 2 plates, he was like going really, really fast. Pop, drops the bar. I catch it, tore his pec. Right. He was on some special protein. He was on some special protein. And so he ended up having a pec tear, and he never did any joint training. His joints were weak. He never trained his joints. Therefore, his tendon and ligament are weak. So that means there was a tissue imbalance. So he had an unbalanced ecosystem. So you have your skeletal system, you have your endocrine system, you have your muscular system, you have all these different systems in your body. And when you train joints, it allows you to balance out the ecosystem. So now as you build joint strength and your bone density is improving and your joint space is being maintained, all the other connective tissues are also improving. So that's the advantage of training mobility. And for me, just like anything else, if I want to grow my bicep, unless there's stress on my bicep will not grow. If I want to build a robust nervous system, unless I'm training that 90 to 100% effort, my nervous system will not develop the way I want it to develop. So the difference with training mobility and doing mobility, the effort levels probably never exceed past like 10%.
Yeah.
Right?
It's maybe kind of doing a passive stretch or
the amount of times I've had athletes tell me like, oh yeah, I do mobility, I do yoga. And I'm like, well, that's not actual mobility training. We're not putting direct stress and we're not specifying which joints and which tissues are receiving the stress. So my program, I don't do mobility, I train mobility. And it's very exhausting, but the benefit, the advantage
Oh yeah.
of having stronger joints when it comes to speed is it immediately enhances everything. So if let's say I had an athlete come in and I just gave them a better hip and all I
Yeah.
did was enhance their hip. Well, we talked about the word unlock, right? Now that their hip can move the way a human hip is supposed to move, they're going to be able to separate their hips when they're sprinting.
Yeah.
So without me teaching hip separation, they're able to separate the hips as a byproduct of having a good hip.
Body will learn how to move when it's given
The freedom.
the freedom to mold itself.
Correct.
Yeah.
So mobility is a staple in all my speed training. It's a staple in everything. To be honest, it's a staple in any program that I do, because having good mobility is a skill that complements any skill that exists.
Copyrighted human athlete skill.
Human athlete skill. Human athlete skill.
Yeah.
So it's very important. It is the foundation of my training. It's what allows, I feel that is the secret sauce. I've always done mobility. I didn't start training mobility with athletes until about 2016.
Yeah. That was the year I met you, was 2016, 2017. And I remember he was doing it with me. I saw huge improvements. And that's, again, why I reached out to you when I started becoming a personal trainer. Because I was like, I want to do this the right way. And I came, even though back then you didn't have the whole human athlete skill thing, I knew that's what you did. And I was like, it just works. And now I'm certified through it. Obviously, you have a couple more certifications through that whole program, which eventually I want to do. But yeah, it's just great stuff. Being able to move opens up so many different doors. And the fact that it's not a big topic is crazy.
And when you think of mobility relative to speed and even relative to skill, let's say, for example, if you are sprinting, but in the background, we're always improving your hips, improving your spine, improving your shoulders, improving your ankles, your knees. That means every time you show up to the sprint session, it's a different version of you that's showing up.
Yeah.
So now you're able to tap into different motor skills that you didn't have before because you're showing up with a new body, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? Versus if I just did mobility, meaning didn't train it, I just loosened up real quick and jumped around and did some jumping jacks. That's not changing the anatomy. So now you go to do the sprint session and the same person is showing up, right? And you got to understand too that we talked about withdrawals versus deposits, right? So most training is a withdrawal, which means there's going to be more inflammation in the joint, right?
Yeah.
So by definition, a joint is the space between two bones. Every time you train your body and you break your body down, you're promoting more inflammation. So then eventually it feels like your joints can't move. It feels like you lack joint space. So by improving that joint space, what I'm essentially doing, I'm improving your inflammation tolerance and I'm giving you the ability to train more and do what you want to do easier. Yeah. And as exciting as this sounds, this is not new. Like everybody in the world knows that mobility, flexibility, all those things are very important. If I asked 100 athletes, how important is mobility and flexibility? They're all going to go, oh my God, it's so important. But then if I ask those same athletes, like who here trains it every day? Crickets. So
you might get that one person who's like, I do mobility for warm up.
Yeah, I do yoga. I stretch.
But the intention's not for training.
Yeah. So it is my, if you guys want to know, like what's the most important thing you can do that have direct impact in your speed is start doing mobility training.
That's why I stated earlier too, like those linemen need more credit, man, because like you were talking about capacity within the joints, you got to strengthen them, and those guys need to really strengthen them. So they got a lot of work they have to do, even in comparison to the regular. So
pounds.
Yeah, big dudes,
some big boys.
But yeah, the mobility, huge thing for everything. Base foundation.